The last time that I truly played through Far Cry 3 was when I was much younger, and since then, a lot has changed. Namely, that I'm much older and my brain is fully developed, which is pretty cool, but more relevant to this video is that I've now racked up thousands and thousands of hours in competitive shooters, which has had a ridiculously profound impact on how I play all video games, new and old. The way I play competitive shooters is now the default mindset for how I play every other game that even remotely lets me play within that framework. And it can be as much of a blessing as it can be a curse. I remember back in 2020, I bought COD 4 Remastered just to play through the campaign again, but after 4 short hours, it was over. The lengthy, sprawling campaign I remember as a kid was replaced with short bursts of action, and before I knew it, Zakhaev was dead and I was rolling credits. Now, having played through Far Cry 3 again, it's evident that this mindset can be crippling to my enjoyment and ultimately leads to me discovering more that I dislike about the game than anything else. Far Cry 3 is a game I tout as one of my favorites of all time. I've posted on social media about it, I've mentioned how great it is to friends, and I'm never shy to talk about its impact on gaming at large. But now I see it through a different lens. A lens built off the back of efficiency, min-maxing, and the playstyles of various competitive shooters. And ultimately, a lens that has altered my opinion on the game my younger self was so fond of. So, let's dive into this mini review / look back / critique / whatever this is on Far Cry 3. Please prepare yourself for brief disconnected thoughts and ramblings from yours truly. Let's get into it.
Did I ever tell you the definition of insanity?
At some point, I'll talk about Vars and the story as a whole, but I think it's only fair to run through what my brain noticed about Far Cry 3 in loose chronological order. Funnily enough, one of the things I love the most about this game that hasn't changed are the visuals. I love the first Island's visuals especially. I don't know what it is about greenery and foliage, but I'm a big fan of it, and Far Cry 3 is very, very green. If we're being real, the color palette of this game is basically just green, yellow, blue, red, and brown. It's distinct though, because using less complex colors just makes everything contrast, and that contrast is really nice. I liked reconnecting with these visuals, but it took some fuckery to get there. Forced motion blur, constant crashes, anti-aliasing that wouldn't fucking disable, man. It was a whole thing just to get this game running on my rig and looking the way I wanted it to. But once we got there, I could finally step in and run around the Rook Islands. The islands in which Far Cry 3 takes place, and an environment I was very eager to relearn for the first time in years. Yeah, I was pretty indifferent to them. Without even hesitating, one of the largest differences I noticed from when I was young to now is how seriously dull the open world gameplay was. You see, when I was a kid, running into a pirate's car, randomly driving down the same road I was running on, was this insane example of emergent gameplay, and my kid brain turned it into a whole thing where I was desperately fighting for my life against these pirates out of pure happenstance, but now it's just... It quickly became apparent that these pirates driving around the islands are like one of 3 examples of emergent open world gameplay. You've got random pirates, assorted animals, and then occasionally someone asks you to repair their car. Now, this isn't to say that Ubisoft open worlds have the expectation of being incredibly dynamic, although to say how when I was a kid, it felt like a playground. Now I just run through it, you treat the pirates as XP vessels, and I have barely any reason to pay attention to or engage with the world around me. The dullness of the open world definitely sticks out more when you can run through it, without it taking your attention by force or intrigue. Traversing the open world when I wasn't fast traveling was an incredibly mixed bag. Some parts of the islands are scalable on foot, whereas other parts are made incredibly difficult by having cliffs that are just a little too steep to run up. I mention this because as someone running through the game quickly, these weren't quirks or challenging in any way. They were just straight up annoying. Not being able to climb certain terrain or having to run around a whole mountain just to get the collectible at the top was a less than stellar experience for sure. Now, I don't know if anyone will remember this, but when Far Cry 3 released, it had a level editor in which you could do basically all the things you would expect to do in a level editor, but I remember playing the shit out of that when I was young as well. So take this as you will, but I kid you not, some parts of the islands genuinely felt like they were put together entirely in that level editor by an amateur. This is even more true for the second island, where every aspect of its design feels much less inspired than the first. It sounds harsh, though there are great looking areas on both islands that are interesting to traverse and explore, but I found the majority of space on either island to be pretty boring in comparison to feeling like it was this dense, unexplored jungle when I was young.
I'm building a cross for Grant.
Thanks. Haven't really had time.
We have to talk.
We will. Just not now. I need to find Riley. If anything happens to that kid...
I miss you.
Something that I really wanted to do with this playthrough was respect the story and try to invest myself in it. It remains one of Far Cry 3's best assets, but as I was going through the story, I kept coming across missions that I just have no memory of that were actually really fun. Buck's treasure hunt was almost entirely wiped from my brain, it seems, because these missions, along with some that appear later on, genuinely have cool environments and set pieces that I just wasn't expecting to see. I mention this because I treated the story missions as a break from my rampage of everything else on the island. I would speed through outposts and collectibles, but I tried to take in the story missions as much as I could, so the ones that were good really stood out. Largely though, these story missions involved killing pirates and mercenaries, and lots of them. The more of them I'd kill, the more numb I'd become, and I understand that that's the point in relation to the narrative and Jason's plunge into madness, but on a technical level, it made me more aware of the problems I had with this game's gunplay, combat, and stealth mechanics. Now, you have to understand that as a competitive shooter enjoyer, gunplay and the mechanics surrounding it are very, very important to me. With that said, I actually kind of like Far Cry 3's gunplay. It does feel quite stiff sometimes, especially if you're using the MS-16 rifle. It's almost like the game locks you in on where you shot your first bullet and doesn't let you move the crosshair away from that spot, but that's a minor complaint compared to the rest of the gunplay, which ultimately felt pretty satisfying, all the stiffness aside. Stealth in Far Cry 3 I found to be very annoying, because it just felt super inconsistent. It felt like I was detected from far away all the time, but then I could walk through the middle of a camp without being seen, so I barely tryharded stealth unless I was actually required to. Such a shame as well, considering the outposts are surprisingly well designed with stealth in mind. In fact, on the topic of outposts, I'm not sure I enjoyed them to the same degree as I did when I was younger. The problem is, when I was younger, I took them seriously. I tried to stealth, I tried to find creative ways to kill the pirates, I tried to not get spotted, and I treated it as if my life was on the line. Now it just takes too much effort to stealth it, so if I fucked up the stealth, I just went guns blazing until it was cleared, and moved on to the next one like it was nothing. I spent such little time with these outposts that by the time I'd liberated all 18 of them, I genuinely wanted some more. This is such a clear example of how the way I've chosen to play the game just has a straight up negative effect on the experience. I could have loaded a car with C4 and drove it in to bomb the compound. I could have shot the animal cage and let it go through the camp by itself. I could have waited for pirate movements to align with my assassinations, or a whole host of other things that would be considered fun. But fun has changed. No longer are these outposts an invitation to get creative. They are instead another number that must go up on my way to 100% completion. I've spoken about how my obsession with playing efficiently impacted different aspects of the game, but I had a sneaking suspicion going into this playthrough that that would happen. So, as I said previously, I actively tried to respect and invest in the story because I genuinely wanted to experience it again. Far Cry 3's story is one of its strongest elements, but I don't think it's nearly as strong as people suggest. The underlying themes and premise are really solid. The idea that Jason changes drastically through thoughtless murder and his experiences on the islands, and how those changes affect his relationship with the friends he's stuck here with, the villains and how their own desires collide with Jason's, to the many interesting side characters we meet along the way. While I was replaying this story, I could not help but feel like so much character building, dialogue, and world building was missing. Every time I expected this group of friends to converse and connect, it felt like I got a couple words out of them before I was out of the cave and on my next mission. Even speaking to each individual outside of cutscenes felt unfulfilling. I wish that there was more with this group of friends. I wish that somehow Ubisoft had connected our friends on the North Island to our journey on the South Island. I wanted more dialogue, which is an insane thing for someone like me to say, but I genuinely wanted more dialogue. I wanted to know more about how these characters are handling the situation that they're currently in, but it all felt jarringly abrupt at times. Like cutscenes would just end so suddenly sometimes. I just sat there in disbelief, longing for more. Maybe it's the 2012 presentation that was the real issue here for me. I'm genuinely not sure, but I just know that something felt like it was missing. Conversely, the villains had a lot more to say. Though the time we spend with Vas is far superior to the time we spend with Buck and Hoyt. You see, Vas's character has some subtlety to it, and you want to spend more time with him to learn more about him. You want to learn what makes him tick, maybe there's some way to break him, or maybe there's more to him than meets the eye. He's memorable, and for all the right reasons. In cutscenes with Vas, time stops, and we focus fully on his madness. Unfortunately, we just don't get the same impact with Buck or Hoyt. While I think many characters in this game could use more dialogue, I think especially Hoyt could use less. Both Buck and Hoyt are what I like to call monologue villains. They spend time reciting history or moral rulings to you instead of having us actually get to know them meaningfully. Of course, through the time we spend with Buck and Hoyt, we do get to know them, but it just feels way too surface level and not nearly as interesting as getting to know Vas. There's a lot of great stuff in the story, don't get me wrong, but the large majority of that occurs on the North Island after we meet Vas, Citra, Earnhardt, and Dennis, and everyone else. It was honestly pretty difficult to get through this story after Vas was dead. It's difficult for me to determine why my thoughts on the Far Cry 3 story are more negative than I thought they'd be, but I think it's a death by 1,000 cuts situation rather than just one large aspect. It's clear that my opinion on Far Cry 3 has changed, but I also recognize how my playstyle and age has impacted that opinion. I'm not ignorant to the fact that a lot of my complaints won't be shared by other people. I've now watched Pyrocynical's Far Cry 3 video twice, and that's a long-ass video, and he speaks about the story really beautifully and about how the narrative intersects with the gameplay, but it's just difficult for me to feel the same way about it. I do love this game, but a lot of that love is based in nostalgia and a fondness for characters like Vas. Games naturally age differently, and Far Cry 3's age definitely shows, but I'm already way over how long I thought this video was going to be, so let's not go into that. That's a whole can of worms with too much detail for this video, but I will say that reflecting on Far Cry 3 has made me appreciative of the time it gave me when I was young, and there's not much more I can say other than I'm grateful for that. I'll put it to you like this. One of the reasons a game like Skyrim is as enduring as it is because it takes hold of your curiosity like no game before it or after it. Skyrim has that locked down like no one else does. Far Cry 3 has that same effect, although this time we can give all the credit in the world to Michael Mando for setting an insanely high standard for acting performances and villains in video games. That shit will never fade away, and Far Cry 3 will be fondly remembered for his performance as Vas alone, and that's some truly magical stuff. Alright, I hope you enjoyed my ramblings. I hope you have a great day. I'll see you later.